Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is the 4th of January 2023. These are the stories that we will be discussing in detail during the course of our show. We will begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the reaction that has come from the Foreign Office from all the comments that have been made by the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Shakir, concerning Pakistan. Now, responding to media queries regarding these series of statements made by him, the spokesperson has said that Pakistan rejects the baseless and frivolous accusations that have been made by the Indian External Affairs Minister. His latest tirade, the spokesperson said, is a reaction and a reflection of the growing frustration over India's failure to malign and isolate Pakistan. And there have been so many efforts that have been made by India over the past decades to malign and destabilize Pakistan directly and indirectly. There's a whole list of such issues, and we will be discussing that in detail in the course of our first segment. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, also concerns India. Now, thousands of Muslim women in Haldwani in India have been protesting against the regime's planned demolition of nearly 4,500 Muslim houses, branding them encroachers of the government land. This concerns about 50,000 Muslims in the Uttarakhand area. Also, the Hindu supremacists are distributing tridents, otherwise known as trishuls, to hundreds of people in Rajasthan. And this points towards a genocide-like situation that has already been stated by Genocide Watch head a very long time ago, a couple of months back. And also, we will be discussing that in detail, how the Muslims are being targeted by the BJP-led fanatics all across India. And then we'll be talking about the UAE and China that have called on Tuesday for a United Nations Security Council meeting after Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar bin Gvir entered Al-Aqsa Mosque courtyards in the occupied East Jerusalem amid wings of unrest. We also know what has been happening, how the Israeli forces have been perpetrating tirades of barbarism against the Palestinians. And the condemnations have come from far and wide, including from Pakistan. So, of course, this council is expected to convene on Thursday. Let's see what happens during the course of this important mood. And finally, we'll be talking about the World Braille Day, ladies and gentlemen, that is being held all across the world today. What is Braille? Braille is a language that is used by visually impaired people in order to read properly. This is a series of dots that are made on different books, on different papers, and the people can read different lectures, they can read different books on it. We've also got Salma Sahiba, who is a member of our Foreign Office, who is also visually impaired and uses Braille, and she also tweeted about the World Braille Day today. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the reaction that has come from the Foreign Office regarding Indian External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar's statements against Pakistan. And as per our spokesperson, this is as a result of the growing frustration over India's failure to malign and isolate Pakistan. More in the following report.
The regional pariah India has a history of unwarranted, gratuitous and provocative acts to divert public attention from domestic challenges. Besides its unilateral hybrid warfare against Pakistan, the belligerent Indian regime is persistently engaged in military build-up and defence pact. In order to ratchet up its hyperbolic rhetoric, Indian External Affairs Minister S.J. Shankar has levelled baseless accusations against Pakistan. Pakistan has rejected the baseless and frivolous accusations made by the Indian External Affairs Minister. This latest tirade is a reflection of growing frustration over India's failure to malign and isolate Pakistan. Earlier this week, the Indian minister made a veiled attack on Pakistan during a press conference in Vienna, along with his Austrian counterpart. The previous year saw no improvement in bilateral ties as India perpetuated brutal repression in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and sponsored terrorism in Pakistan. The uncivilized outburst of Indian External Affairs Minister against Pakistan further dashed any hope for the resumption of early engagements between the two nuclear-armed neighbours. For the last several years, India has engaged in a malicious campaign to mislead the international community through a fictitious narrative of victimhood and vile anti-Pakistan propaganda. Pakistan's key concern is the paramount importance of strategic stability in South Asia. The regional
Let's talk a little bit about the statement that has emanated from the Foreign Office spokesperson as a result of these statements that have come from the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar. I will say quote unquote what the spokesperson said. She said Pakistan rejects the baseless and frivolous accusations made by the Indian External Affairs Minister. His latest tirade is a reflection of the growing frustration over India's failure to malign and isolate Pakistan. She has said instead of pointing fingers at others, India should itself end its involvement in terrorism, subversion and espionage against Pakistan. Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja Sahiba joins us online. She is the Executive Director, Center of International Strategic Studies in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Sahiba, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Sahiba, when you look at these statements, nothing new there because we've heard so many other different statements from the Indian elite, the Indian defense minister in the past as well. But these statements coming from the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, do they point towards Indian frustration because they are not able to do or get the results of all the malicious campaigns that they have been handling against Pakistan?
Omar, you rightly pointed out these allegations from India are not new. But now the thing is that they appear very childish, especially with reference to what Indian government itself is doing against their own people, against Indian minorities. So definitely when we see that what is happening, if we see it with the perspective or while analyzing the latest wave or incidents of terrorism in Pakistan, it clearly looks like a mudslinging by Indian External Affairs Minister so that fingers should not be pointed to India for all those acts of destabilizing Pakistan. And definitely how we can forget Kulbhushan Yadav, how we can forget that Indian sitting military officers burned Samjhota Express, killing more than 80-90 people, Muslims in that train. How we can forget the Indian nexus to support terrorist activities in Pakistan and all those threats posed to us by Indian ministers, as you yourself pointed out. So definitely Mr. Jaishankar has lost his ground because whether it is needed or not, on every international forum he tries to tarnish the image of Pakistan because if we see the latest trend of last few years, world is questioning India about the human rights violation in illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The world wants to know that how India is treating their minorities and all those acts by India which are threatening the sovereignty and integrity of all these South Asian neighboring states as they are smaller than India. So definitely India cannot, as a student of international security, I can see that India cannot for a longer period of time market itself as a strategic competitor of China, because very soon if we see the dynamics of international strategic alignments and realignments, India would lose that ground that, okay, India is there to compete with China for the sake of the Western interests, because India did not stand by the West or the USA against Russia in the Russia-Ukrainian war. So this is what is the proof. It is what that tells a lot about how Indian Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry are formulating Indian defense and foreign policies. So Mr. Jaishankar, instead of all, I see that Mr. Jaishankar is losing friends, if there were any. Mr. Jaishankar's policies and aggressive international posturing, which is definitely not a body language of a diplomat, is isolating India because he is creating foes. And if you see Twitter today, there are so many tweets by Indian diplomats that this arrogant and aggressive behavior of Mr. Jaishankar would lose those countries which stand by India and help India on international forums. So
Dr. Saab, it's very
definitely this.
interesting, but all this detailed analysis that you've just given me and our audience as well. This said, when you say that the statements by Mr. Jaishankar are childish, and when he points fingers at Pakistan, saying that Pakistan is the epicenter of terrorism, quote unquote, don't you feel that epicenter of terrorism, in fact, is India itself, with all that it has been perpetrating, not only against Muslims, that even if we put aside, against all the other minorities as well, whether they be Sikhs or they be Dalits, there are definite proofs of that from all across India. I understand there is a geostrategic alignment between India and other important world powers, but till which extent can India take its maneuvering, its terrorist maneuvering, till such time that there is a definite reaction that comes even from its partners?
Umar, as Mr. Jaishankar talked about the past, so and you talked about that Indian policies are destabilizing for the region, and India is supporting terrorist activities. How we can forget how India tried to destabilize Sri Lanka, how India has tried to isolate Nepal and never allowed all those states to have independent foreign and defense policy. We know what happened to Bhutan. We are well aware how India is trying. Who can forget 1971, which India takes as a matter of pride? How we can forget that what happened to all the religious places of minorities in India? So Indian terrorism has an effect on all the countries of South Asia, to be precise. So this is and now when we see illegally Indian occupied Kashmir, India's state-sponsored terrorism has been registered by several international organizations in the world, and they are questioning. We know that India is, as we already talked about it, that India is sliding down on all the indexes of democratic values. So this is all like a cosmetic change, and we should not forget that Modi government or BJP regime is very good in propaganda. Modi sold like a failed governance in the last elections in India as a matter of pride and as a crown or as a trump card to Indian public. So whatever be Modi's, if you ask me, this one strength which makes Modi a successful leader, that is their capacity and their how good they are in propaganda. So
But Dr. Saab, I understand they are very good in propaganda, but to which extent will the Indian public even take this? There will be a time when there will be a very strong rebuttal. Or do you feel that the Indian public are so brainwashed by the so-called propaganda machine of the BJP that reminds us of the propaganda machine of the Hitler's Nazi regime as well? Don't you feel that they will come out of this, or do you feel they have been completely taken by this power of maneuvering by Mr. Modi and his government?
Right now, India is passing through an age of majoritism, where majoritism is the key thing, and the group, ethnic or religious group in majority, has superseded all the human rights of the others. So majoritism is the populism in India. So it is bringing vote. The credit goes to BJP regime and Mr. Modi, that they have made hatred against Pakistan, against Muslims, a saleable commodity in India. It gets them highest votes in elections. So definitely I don't see that anytime soon Modi would lose his popularity in the Indian domestic politics. And how they do that, they create if you see Indian media, you would never see that whatever the point of view of government is, there would not be any alternate narrative or point of view available on Indian official and private media. In any case, all Indian media, regardless of the fact if they are official or they are private channels, they only create echo of government stance and what government's policy is, whether it is based on hatred, or they have to flare up war mania, or they have to create false allegation or establish false allegation against Pakistan, or matter of fact for any other state, they do that on the behest of Indian government as as supporters of Indian government. Therefore,
All right.
Indian public practically doesn't have any accessibility to alternate narrative. It is
That
Indian
is the
media
only
which has
narrative in your point
created.
of view that is available to the Indian public, and they are kind of lapping it wholeheartedly, apart from those segments at least who are intelligent enough and are trying to raise a voice, whether it be Rana Ayub, whether it be other journalists, but all those are also being sidelined. This said, you know, Pakistan's role has been very important in highlighting all the atrocities, the barbarities that India has been perpetrating within India and in Pakistan as well. The latest being the incident that involved the murder of people in Lahore in 2021, and there was a whole dossier that was shared by Pakistan. Do you feel
Recently,
the
Pakistan shared
international
a dossier in UN.
audience or the global bodies are reacting to it, understand the Pakistan's narrative, and also understand that this narrative is based on truth and not fallacies, just like, I mean, what India is perpetrating?
Yes, and you see that whatever such situation is, I think that if Pakistan would invite international human rights organizations to investigate those things, and if India and again for illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because whatever we say, world takes it like, okay, these both countries have animosity and a long history of enmity, so it's their personal, or it's some bilateral problem. So it would add credibility if we would invite international organizations to come and see by themselves that how India is conducting human rights violation, and if India thinks that these are the allegations from Pakistan, then India should allow all those international organizations to visit illegally Indian occupied Kashmir and see, and whole India, whatever incidents of mob lynching, genocide, massacres, destruction of religious sites, because all these acts are prohibited in international law. All those acts are prohibited in international humanitarian law. So India should be at one point of time should be answerable to international community. But the problem with international law is that it comes into action, or it becomes active after the damage has been done, after the violence has been perpetrated, after the massacre or genocide has been completed. Then international community with the help
Will
of
play some
UNO
kind of a role in
exercise
kind
their
of
right to
disseminating this tirade by the Indian BJP government. This anti-Pakistan statement or the tirade of statements that have emanated from India, do you feel they are a tactic to divert attention of the world body from what is happening in against the Muslims and what is happening in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
Definitely. As I said, that India wants world to look into the wrong direction. Being the largest biggest state of South Asia, India being a destabilizing, being a state actor which is highly irresponsible, whether it comes to the strategic decisions or and the strategic assets or supporting terrorist activities in the region. India does not have clean hands. Recently, Pakistan, I think last month, Pakistan submitted a dossier in UNO about Indian involvement in financing terrorism in the region. So India needs to prove that those allegations are wrong instead of pointing fingers to Pakistan, because world know it is a clearly stated fact that Pakistan is the only country in the world which has the largest number of sacrifices to fight against terrorism. Moreover, we are the only country of the world to overcome terrorism, and this latest whatever happening in Pakistan, inshallah, we will get rid of that and of those acts, and the enemies, whatever enemy is thinking, if they can destabilize Pakistan or during these
they are extremely wrong in all such methods of thinking as far as destabilizing Pakistan is concerned, because our armed forces and our civilians will stand up against all such atrocities as they have been, and they will continue to do so. Finally, a lot of important players across the world say that Pakistan and and India need to sit together for talks. All thorny issues need to be discussed. Pakistan has time and again also invited India for talks on different fora, but India has always refused for one reason or the other. Do you ever feel that there could be a negotiation process between India and Pakistan that could lead to some kind of a positive culmination of all these barbarities that India is perpetrating against Muslims and in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir? Is there hope?
Umar, when ball hits the ground, it has to come up. So Pakistan and India have only two options. Either they should settle their problems through war, or they should settle their problems through negotiations. So negotiation is the way where a wise person, a wise and mature nation would go. And it is the responsibility, because Pakistan always offer that Pakistan is interested in talks, and it is India which always drum that India is only wants a bilateral resolution of conflicts with Pakistan. So India supports bilateralism, but when Pakistan offer them talks, negotiations and peaceful conflict resolution processes, it is India, it is BJP regime, it is Modi who refuse to be part of any such activity. So, and which is against the spirit of bilateralism. But it should be decided by Indian government, by Modi regime, by BJP regime, that if they would resolve those conflicts with Pakistan, or they would leave those conflicts to the next generations, Indian generations, to come and resolve with Pakistan.
Of course,
so,
but you know, this said Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja
have to be resolved through negotiations. And
I mean, they have to be, but the problem remains that India doesn't want to have a negotiated process because it knows that it is in the wrong. It knows that whatever it is doing is its fault, and that whatever negotiation process.
And whatever India's strategic designs are, they are not compatible with peaceful conflict resolution for Pakistan. If India would be interested in peace, they would implemented UN resolution 48 again regarding Kashmir. India lost so many right movements when they could have solved all those problems with Pakistan. Kashmir conflict is only about right to self-determination. As you know, that Hurriyat Conference has announced 5th January as a day where the right to self-determination would be celebrated by Kashmiri people. So this is only a question of a democratic right, that if a specific indigenous community, ethnic community, they are given the right to decide what they want for their
exactly, and that is what the world needs to give to the people of illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is what the United Nations needs to give to these people: the right to decide what they want to do with their lands, what they want to do with the place that they live in, the right to self-determination that has been enshrined in various United Nations Security Council resolutions. Thank you very much, Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja Sahaba, Executive Director, Center of International Strategic Studies, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this very important issue, that is the latest statements that have emanated from the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, and the strong rebuttal that has come from the Foreign Office spokesperson on this issue as well. Our second segment also pertains to India and what it is perpetrating against its minorities, especially the Muslims, whether it be the Muslim women in Haldwani who are protesting against the demolition of nearly 4,500 houses that of course concern around 50,000 Muslims in that area, whether it be the tridents or the rituals that are being distributed amongst the BJP right-wing activists. And of course, that is again an attempt to create more or less a genocide-like situation. This tirade against Muslims, this tirade against the minorities is what our second segment is all about. More in the following report.
Narendra Modi-led Hindutva Indian government is instigating egregious violations of religious and fundamental freedoms, resulting in bleak human rights situation and democratic backslide. Indian assault on democratic values and civil liberties has now garnered global attention, and the country as a whole is being periodically called out for rising Islamophobia and the institutionalized dilution of Muslim rights. The brutal Hindu nationalist BJP regime is demolishing houses of 50,000 Muslims in the middle of winter. The Muslim residents in Haldwani town of Indian state Uttarakhand were rendered homeless as they were asked to vacate their houses. Hundreds of residents in Uttarakhand's Haldwani held massive protests after the High Court directed the removal of thousands of houses in Muslim area of the city. This development indicates Indian judiciary's collusion with the Hindutva government as it rendered 50,000 people homeless without making any arrangements for their rehabilitation. In 2016, the court had ordered demolition of all houses, but the residents pleaded before the court that railways should have heard them before issuing the eviction notice arbitrarily. This cruel move has confirmed Pakistan's long-standing assertion that BJP-led government is directly responsible for fomenting Islamophobic violence and massacre of Muslims, and it's high time to hold India accountable for its blatant violations of human rights.
Now, the barbarities against the Muslims or even other minorities in India is nothing new, whether it be the different incidents of violence, different incidents of taking people out of their homes. And of course, we all know what is happening in India, illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and we have highlighted that time and again. But now this is going beyond the Indian held Kashmir region and going within India itself, whether it be in Uttarakhand, where around 50,000 people, 50,000 Muslims are going to be affected by the 4,500 houses that are being demolished, whether it be the open distribution of Trishools that is happening in order to create much havoc on the Muslims and all the minorities in India. This is the whole tirade, the whole scenario that is being created within India to A, create violence against Muslims, B, to create a genocide-like situation, and C, to let the Muslims and other minorities become in such a situation that they cannot react in any way whatsoever. Dr. Salma Malik, who is a foreign affairs expert, joins us online. Dr. Salma, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always a pleasure. It had been some time that we had talked on this very show. What kind of justice is this when you render 50,000 people homeless in one state alone, and those 50,000 are Muslims?
Assalamu alaikum, Omar. Thank you so much for having me in the program. This is a very critical situation, and one aspect that the Modi government or the tactic that the Modi government has always used is that whenever the elections are closing in, and in India, given the size of the country, there are elections taking place at one time or another in one of the states in any case. So they use these pressure tactics to win over the larger saffron sentiments and to intimidate the population groups, especially the Muslims. And Muslims are a very easy target in India nowadays, and people love to hate them. This is something which the Modi government has managed to create in the mindset of an average Indian, that Muslims are people who need to be culled. There are people who need to be put down to size, and if they are pushed out, the Ghar Wapsi program, if you may recall, then this would be a wonderful notion because they are impure. So this is actually reminiscent of Hitler's mindset at the peak of the genocide, or rather I would say at the beginning of the genocide that he had carried out in Germany against the Jews. And this is exactly the same stuff that Modi is doing in India against the Muslims, calling them impure, trying to push them out, doing all of these tactics, which is making him popular with the Saffron Brigade. And in that capacity, it is also maligning the minds of an average Indian who thinks that government is absolutely right in doing what they're doing. This is a very strange kind of a socio-political or socio-psychological experiment where you try to give your own population group this sense of superiority in which they consider the other people, other nationalities or other religious groups as the others and the impures. So it is perfectly all right to push them out, perfectly all right to carry out human rights violations.
Dr. Salma, you called it an experiment, and I totally agree with you on that. But this experiment at the onset of the Second World War could be understood because it was many, many decades back where the human rights and human rights councils and human rights organizations had been established when the United Nations wasn't present. Now that we have all of these organizations, when we openly see a country such as India that is using politics as bait to massacre Muslims, to render them homeless, to perpetrate all kinds of barbarities on them. Why is the world staying silent?
Well, you see, you would find a lot of ultra-nationalists who support Modi in his program, both within India as well as outside India. And it is perfectly all right. I mean, it's a very colloquial term on my part to say that it's perfectly all right to target the Muslims, because the Muslims are to be targeted worldwide and it's fashionable. So he finds a lot of favorable audience, not only within India, but also outside India, where you find similar discriminations being carried out, perhaps not of this magnitude, in France, even in Trump's US. And when Netanyahu came to India and told the Indians that they should carry out a Palestinization of Kashmir, no one really kind of blinked an eye on that, and everyone was agreeable to this notion. So if we had so many champions of human rights within India, outside India, things wouldn't have been different. And also another factor that one needs to see is that by carrying out such actions, you create such a fear factor that even those who would like to stand for human rights inside a country would fear for their lives. And you can see this happening a lot in Kashmir, where the Kashmiri journalists or many other people who have stood for the rights of the Muslims have been targeted and made a worse example. So people fear for their lives and then they become compliant. So there's also one notion as to why you would find a very silent and docile civil society in India. But having said that,
you talked about compliance, Dr. Salma. I would like to use the word against for my next question. Compliance to which end? I mean, what is the limit of this compliance?
Compliance to the end where they think that by agreeing to all of these notions, they won't be hurt. So no one wants to get hurt. And that is the level of compliance, and that is the level of turning a blind eye to any of the discriminations or any of the human rights violations taking place. So long as they are safe, so long as their children are safe, they are fine with that. And they don't want to come to a position where they are hurt, they are made to leave their homes, they are made to suffer, or their families, or you have missing persons and so many other things. India has a way of, or the Modi regime has a way of damaging people and damaging them very well, making them hurt. So you would find a population, a civil society which was educated, which was tolerant, which upheld a lot of ideal rights, but now none of those rights they want to really hold on true to them for the factor that they cannot afford to get hurt. So that is a major.
But do you feel, Dr. Salma, at any point of time in the near future or the distant future, there is going to be a reaction from the people? You can only push anything to a certain extent. There's always a reaction. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That is one of Newton's law. Do you feel it could be applicable in India as well? We are seeing the beginning of genocide in so many different areas of India. Do you feel the Indian society will stand up?
There would be a lot of unrest, but the might of the government, the extremist might, this is not an extremism which is carried out by a minority. This is an extremism which is carried out by the government. They might be lesser in number, but this is how classic genocide is all about, where a minority government can inflict systematic violence against a particular caste, creed, ethnic population group and get away with this. This is what happened in Rwanda. The world was silent even then. This has happened in so many other countries. No one.
Dr. Salma, you talked of Rwanda. I'd like to show again a similarity. In a recent incident in Rajasthan, a lot of the workers of the BJP were being given trishools or tridents in order to use against the minorities. Doesn't that remind you also of what happened in Rwanda?
Absolutely, absolutely. But you see, Omar, that's the point. In Rwanda, we saw these small children, underage children, they were under 10, and they had machetes in their hand, and they had so many, and the sense of empowerment, the righteousness, and feeling suddenly empowered overnight was something that really brought about genocide, and the sitting regime did it. And this is precisely what Modi Brigade is also doing in India. It's not only turning people out of their homes, and these are the homes which they had for generations. It is technically rendering them vulnerable to any kind of attack, no refuge, nothing. They're out on the streets, and they're easy, vulnerable targets. They're soft targets which can be picked up and killed by anyone. They can be stoned, they can be killed, thresholds can be used against them. So many things can happen. And no one will say anything. I mean, there have been public lynchings. There have been so many other factors. In Modi's India, you would have small children of the age 4 to 5 years who are carrying out tableaus in how to kill or how to bring down something that looks like a mosque in less than 60 seconds, right? So this is giving them those ideas at their very formative
So
stage.
basically
At
what
the
they are
time-
trying to do is raise a whole generation or different generations that will have a completely different mindset as to how to treat the
Absolutely.
minorities.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is a very systematic psychological programming of the next generation India, precisely the point that you were saying, in which this generation grows up with this idea that these people are evil and they have to be destroyed. And there is no two opinions on that. And this is how Modi's India is doing with minorities at large, but specifically with the Muslims.
You know, if you remember well, Dr. Salma, there was some time back a whole report that came out as far as India's role in perpetuating Islamophobia online, especially is concerned. Now, when I talk of Islamophobia, I also go back a couple of years and talk about 2018, when the India's Interior Minister Amit Shah had said that Bangladeshi citizens who had entered India illegally were infiltrators who had eaten our country like termites. I mean, is this the way you refer to people?
Absolutely. Just imagine. I mean, just notice the term termite. Termite is a stealthy animal, a stealthy insect, not even an animal, an insect, which hides and destroys you. So it's something which is obvious, and it destroys the roots. It slowly and gradually erodes the roots of a solid house, of a solid wood. And this is the type of similarity that they're drawing with humans. In Hitler's Germany, the Jews were the cockroaches. Here he is using the term termite. So you're decreasing the value of human life to a lesser insect, and that is something that we need to focus on. The choice of language, the terminology is precisely what is hitting home. So again, I go back to the point that the new generation that you also talked about is a generation which will rise with this inbuilt, innate idea of people they are coexisting with who are not fit enough to be humans, who are
Dr. Salma, under the current circumstances that we are all witnessing worldwide, including in Pakistan as well, the way India is behaving and the way India is moving forward, can it be called a democracy or should it be called a theocracy now? When the Indian PM talks of India being a pluralistic country, can those terms still be used by him?
Well, the world considers them democracy because it suits them. Even in today's world, the US is also not that type of a democracy, which it was proud to be at one time. I totally agree with you. India has turned into a theocracy. And the earlier point that you have talked about, the way out of it, unfortunately, the Congress or any of these political parties which could be the alternate or bring about that particular sentiment back or democracy back to India are also mimicking for popularity more majority vote base similar sentiments when it comes to the Muslim population. So unfortunately, as the Modi regime will progress and once Modi is out of picture, there would be yet another member who would take him over, and he would take this legacy a step further. So it is going to get worse in times because for the moment we don't really see any on the horizon which could provide that type of alternative narrative to India to bring it back to those old tenets of democracy, or the classic tenets of democracy that India always professed to hold. We also know that during Nehru's time, the Babri Mosque, right after the inception of India, the episode started. And it was Indira Gandhi who, during her emergency rule, carried out a mass campaign against the Muslim population groups to decrease their number. And now you see this thing, Rajiv Gandhi did it with the Sikhs, Indira Gandhi did it with the Sikhs, then with the Tamil population, then the Seven Sister States have always been targeted. So it's just been very systematic. And of course, that provides a very open card to the Modi government to do whatever they wanted to do. And
another addition to this systematic use of force against minorities includes the Indian citizenship law, which was amended to a 1955 legislation, which allows Indian citizenship to persecuted minorities, but there is no mention or reference to Muslims. Do you feel further actions of this sort are going to be expected in the by this government taking the jibe of the Indian judiciary, or taking under the umbrella of the Indian judiciary? Do you feel such measures will further be taken to persecute or to sideline Muslims?
That's a very good question, Omar. There was a time when the Indian judiciary was considered to be a very impartial, upright judiciary. But now, the latest rulings that we see happening, one can figure out that the Indian judiciary is a shadow of its previous self. And there's nothing that they should stand proud of. They are as discriminatory, as compromised as the government wants them to be. And everyone is currying favors. So you see, when you are moving away from tolerance and inclusivity, the first thing that you start targeting or influencing are the institutions.
That is so true. Dr. Salma, I'd like to cut you short and ask you my last question. We're a bit short of time. Muslims are not the only ones who persecuted. The Christians and Sikhs and Dalits are as well. There is a report that has come out from the United Christian Forum that there were 486 instances of violence and harassment against Christians last year alone. It said that 2021 was the most violent year for Christians. This said, there is also the whole issue of the church that was vandalized and a statue of Mary destroyed in Chhattisgarh state. There are other minorities that are also being sidelined, that are also being subjugated to violence. Will there ever be an end, Dr. Salma? Do you see an end in sight?
The end can only happen if from within and as well as outside there is sufficient sanctioning of India and sufficient opposition to the sitting regimes which are going genocidal, and prevent them from carrying out what they're doing. At one hand, would have Muslims being killed and the streets turning red, and Trump embracing Modi and dancing to silly songs. So if this is happening, there would be more impunity. Unless until the international audience sanctions India, chastises them on what India is doing and carrying out steps to prevent them from doing it, they will keep doing it with impunity, and there will be nothing stopping them. So
let's hope, Dr. Salma, that end comes in sight sooner than later, before it's way too late for India to correct itself and to correct its policies towards its minorities. Thank you very much, Dr. Salma Malik, foreign affairs expert, joining us and talking to us about the different forms of atrocities that are being committed by the Indian BJP government against its minorities, especially Muslims, but also Christians, Sikhs and Dalits. Let's come to our last two stories. The first concerns the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the visit by an Israeli security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque and that created a lot of unrest and very strong rebuttals and reactions from different quarters across the world, including from Pakistan. The UAE and China have subsequently called for a United Nations Security Council meeting after this visit by the security minister, because there was a lot of reaction that emanated. Also, this reaction came from a close ally of Israel, that is the United States. I would want to quote what Ned Price said: "We are deeply concerned by any unilateral actions that have had the potential to exacerbate tensions, precisely because we want to see the opposite happen." This is what Ned Price said. He's a State Department spokesperson. He also said the United States stands firmly for the preservation of the historic status quo with respect to the to the holy sites that are present in Jerusalem. Of course, we all know the importance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and how it represents the world's third holiest site. Of course, there is a whole dispute with the Israelis, with the Jews. They say that there is also the area called the Temple Mount, which is present in the same location. Well, let's see. This moot is going to happen on Thursday. What is decided in this very important meeting following the visit of the Israeli security minister to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let's come to an important event that happens every year on this very day, and that is the World Bride Day. Now, World Bride Day happens on the 4th of January. It is a day that raises awareness of the importance of the Braille language in helping blind and partially sighted people communicate. What is Braille? A lot of people might ask. Braille is a system of raised dots, as you can see in the little window, parallel window, which enables a blind person or someone with a visual impairment to write and to read as well. They use the fingers to feel the shapes of the dots, and that is how they know which word it is or which number it is. It is based on 6 dots like the designs of a domino. It consists of 63 symbols which are made up of all the possible combinations of these dots. Braille has been used in all the world's languages. It was invented nearly 200 years ago in 1824 by Frenchman Louis Braille. It is also being used by a lot of people here in Pakistan. It was Salim Saiba, who is a member of the foreign ministry, also uses the Braille, and she also raised awareness about the importance of the World Bride Day today in a post that she put on Twitter. We need to help our those people who are in need of that, and we need to come up with innovative measures so that those who are visually impaired or are using Braille can use it more effectively. And we need to also involve them in our society just like normal human beings. That is our responsibility as citizens of Pakistan, as citizens of the world. This brings us to the end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Allah Hafiz.